Hello and welcome to the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook Season 2, Episode 5, featuring Pete Matthew, all about creating a marketing engine. Matthew is a legend. There is a really good chance that you've heard his story before. After reading the book Crush It by Gary Vaynerchuk, Pete realised that he could use the internet and social networking to get a very important message across. A chartered financial planner and managing director of Jackson's Wealth Management in Penzance, Pete is the driving force behind the movement that is meaningful money. What started as a series of basic personal finance explainer videos shot with a cheap video camera on the beaches of Cornwall has grown into a massively popular audio podcast with more than 3.2 million downloads to date. In this conversation, I wanted to take Pete a little bit off the well-worn path and ask him some slightly different questions about financial planner content marketing and how we can all get started right now. So here's my conversation with Pete Matthew in Season 2, Episode 5 of the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook. So welcome, Pete Matthew, to the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook. This is not your first rodeo. You and I have both been guests on and presented many podcasts. But for people who don't know about you and about your background and what it is you do, and there's probably very few of them out there in the financial planner world at the moment, tell us the potted history. Who are you? What do you do?
Okay, potted. I'm Pete Matthew. I'm managing director of Jackson's Wealth Management down in Penzance. My accent is northern though. I married a Cornish girl and that's why I ended up at the very end of the country. 22-year veteran financial advisor and followed the classic path, tied advisor, IFA, financial planner, and now I co-own and run this practice down in Penzance, which is very well established. Passionate about financial planning and about financial education, and to that end, nearly 10 years ago, I experimented with a video camera and started shooting sort of simple explainer videos on personal finance under the name of Meaningful Money. And that has become a monster. So it's a YouTube channel. It became a podcast in 2012. And it now takes up more and more of my time and has just surprised me and continues to do so. Just that its scope and the response that it gets, and that I'm still having fun doing it.
It's an interesting point. That was nearly a decade ago, and I remember those first videos. You on a windswept Cornish beach, talking into your camera about various, I guess, basic personal finance functions. But did you ever think back then it would become such a monster and what it would turn into?
No, the whole thing, Martin, has happened entirely by accident. I'd love to say that I planned it all. I don't have that kind of foresight. It started because several reasons, which I've sort of talked about before, but I read a book by Gary Vaynerchuk, and his message basically in the book called Crush It is, look, if you've got a message and if you want people to hear it, it's now easier than ever. So just start. And if it's good, people will turn up and listen. And I just thought I'd have a go. And so it started very much as a hobby. There was no pressure. There was, no expectations of it really. I certainly didn't set out for it to become a marketing engine. Turns out I'm doing something called content marketing, which I'm not even sure that phrase was coined back in 2010 when I started. But it turns out that it's become a marketing engine, which was never the intention. It was genuinely just to try and fill a gap in knowledge, because we don't teach personal finance at school. We don't teach it properly in the workplace. There are some moves towards that, but it's certainly not done right yet. And the internet is an incredible medium, and if people want to show up and learn about this stuff, then I just wanted to have some content for them to see. And it turns out that if you do that long enough and consistently enough, it leads to a whole load of client inquiries to your financial planning firm. So that was a happy accident, but it's completely changed Jackson's, completely changed my life in all kinds of ways.
Why video? I mean, you picked up a video camera for your first, dabbling with content marketing, and that's a strange decision in the sense that video is probably the most complicated medium to edit, to produce. People get nervous in front of the camera, particularly 10 years ago. People weren't doing that. So why not a blog and why not a podcast on day one? Why was it a video camera?
Yeah, I can write, and I do write, but I wasn't excited by writing. I found a little bit too much sort of perfectionism in it, and I found I would write something and then obsess over the editing, and it would never go out. And by the time it did go out, it wasn't timely anymore. Podcasting was in a kind of slump when I started, really. It was I mean, you well know you were doing it back in 2004 or 5 or whatever. And it was really complicated then, sort of organizing all the different bits that would create an RSS feed. I mean, you probably created your first RSS feed by hand, didn't you?
Hand coded, yeah.
Exactly, right? So obviously you don't have to do that anymore. And so that didn't really float my boat. And to be honest, I wasn't listening to podcasts then, so it didn't, whereas I was watching YouTube. So, and Gary Vaynerchuk, the sort of one of my online heroes, he was doing video. And so I guess that was how it was really. But I am a nerd. I've always loved computers. I've always loved technology and software, and trying to wrangle software to make it do what I want is a happy evening well spent from my point of view. So it appealed to my nerdiness. And obviously there's power in video in that you get to see the whole picture, you get to see nuance and facial expression and body language and stuff like that. I think with video, you have to be very good or very different, because even back in 2010, YouTube was a very deep pool, and it's even deeper now. So you have to be very, very good at the art of video. So somebody like a Peter McKinnon or a Matti Haapoja, some of these guys who are videographers, and can just put together art really in what is the most mundane of subject matters, sometimes just a day in their life. You either have to be very good or very different. Somebody like Mr. Beast, who basically just gives money away, or Colin Furze, who just builds incredible things in his garage. And you've got to be very different or very good, I think. And I wasn't at YouTube. I mean, there wasn't many people doing what I was doing, but I never really gained traction. And then I started listening to podcasts, and so I made the switch, and I'm glad I did.
The nerdiness is, I think, quite an important factor even today. I mean, you do have to have a certain level of engagement with the toys, the technology. I mean, even looking at your studio setup behind you, have the uplighting and the colored lighting and things, and it's obviously all intentional, and it's developed over the years. You didn't start off when you were podcasting with a beautifully lit studio. So how much do you need to love the toys and love the equipment, love the technology?
I think it helps, but I don't think it's necessary. So, if there are business owners watching this and thinking, I can barely turn my computer on, let alone dive into Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro and start editing video, or understand why these lights need to be a certain frequency so that it's not flickering, that sort of stuff. But to be honest, I've learned all that by doing, but you don't have to. I really do think it helps, and it certainly helps you to bootstrap if you're prepared to learn this stuff. So my first camera was literally a flip video camera. It cost £100. It's about the size of a packet of fags, and that was, and it had a USB stick that kind of flipped out, and you could just plug it in the side of your computer. Files went across, and there was minimal editing then. It's basically the odd title that I sort of struggle for hours to get to look even remotely half decent. And you just get a little bit better each time. And I've done something like 500 odd videos now, and 300 and more than that, actually, probably 400 odd podcasts. And each one is a little bit better, and I still make rookie mistakes. I'll still do a half-hour recording, watch it back and think, forgot to set this setting, and it means I have to do it all again. I've done that, and I'm sure you have as well.
Yeah.
So it's a learning process. So enjoying the process helps, but it's not necessary. You can just buy it in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, podcasting in the UK financial planning space is still, I guess, more or less at its infancy. We can count on probably now both hands the number of financial planners who have their own podcasts, and there's more coming, which is great news. But why the reluctance, do you think, for financial planners to start what you term as content marketing, to start a video channel, to start a podcast, to write blogs?
I think I do. I've had conversations over the years where I've been asked to speak on marketing, which I think is hilarious because I have zero marketing qualifications, right? I've just learned by doing. So I get asked at those conferences, it's like, well, I've got all the clients I need, so why do I bother? And that's, I think, is an entirely valid argument. From my point of view, I've kept the going so long, firstly because I enjoy it. If I didn't, I wouldn't. But I've kept going so long because it has spawned fruit, but it took a while. Yeah. I think if I was starting again now, it would bear fruit much quicker because I've learned a great deal, obviously. So if you could go back 10 years knowing what I know now, then I think I'd probably crush it. And I'm sure, you would too. You've learned so much in the more than a decade that you've been doing this. So I think probably a couple of reasons. I don't need new clients, or I don't need many new clients. I'm getting everything I need from traditional mediums. An entirely valid argument. I wouldn't argue with that at all. Reluctance with the technology. That's an obvious barrier. You have to remember, there is, I can't remember, is it Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell's book, where he talks about, people like Bill Gates and stuff. They just happened to really be born in the right place at the right time to become the sort of computer geniuses that they were. And I look back on my life, certainly as far as technology is concerned, I'm 45, just gone. And my dad, as well as being a church minister, was a editor of a Christian magazine. So we always had computers in the house. We always had the early Apricot PCs and then the IBMs and all that. And so I grew up with computers in the house. Whereas my brother-in-law, who's only 5 years older than me, he just didn't really. And so I'm kind of at the age where I was on the vanguard of computers starting to really be prevalent. I remember when I was 6 years old, my computer got my school got a Commodore PET, which was about the size of a house, tiny little screen. But by the time I left school at 18, we had suites of PCs doing computer-aided design. So, I kind of grew up on the vanguard of home computer use. And while I'm not a coder, I can get by, but I'm certainly not a coder. That's just kind of wired in me. And I just happen to have been born at roughly the right time to have grown up understanding software. Whereas, my kids, man, they can wrangle a computer better than I ever will. And so I think a lot of advisors are older than I am, right?
Yeah.
Still, I'm not the baby that I was in the industry, but a lot of advisors are older than I am. And that, I'm sure, will be a factor in their sort of somewhat reluctance to really dive into the technology.
I overheard a conversation towards the last part of last year at a bar at a conference, financial planning conference, and it was people saying, well, there's no point in me getting started with a blog now or a podcast now or a video because it will take me 3 years, 5 years, 7 years to create the back catalogue of content that the likes of Pete have got, that you've got. Is that a good reason not to get started today? And then there's a lovely Chinese proverbs, and they're about the best time to plant a tree being 20 years ago, second best time today, which I always fall back on. But does it take a long time to build an audience, to build a tribe, to build a presence?
It can do, yeah. And easily the best tool you've got to build anything is consistency. A couple of times when I've spoken, I've shown a graph. When I started doing podcasts, I did, I think, 13 episodes in 6 months. It's very sporadic, 2 weeks between, 3 weeks between each one. And I thought, no, if I'm going to do this, I need to go weekly and commit. Yeah. And it just hockey sticked up in terms of the number of listeners. And so with podcasts, and I think with any kind of content, regularity, consistency is vital. It really does depend on what your aims are, right? Numbers fundamentally are irrelevant. I am fairly lucky in that I had early mover advantage in what I do, right? It was like me and you, and that's probably it. At the time, doing anything remotely like content marketing in the financial planning space. So I benefited from that. And if you're starting now 10 years later, you simply won't benefit from that. In the podcast space, you rightly say, there's still a very small number doing it. So I think that's a great medium. If I was starting from scratch now, I would start with a podcast for sure. But it's hard to get traction writing. It's hard to get traction on YouTube. But it depends what you want out of it. If you want 1 million subs, then that's going to be difficult, right? I've been doing YouTube 10 years and I'm up to nearly 6,000, but it's really starting to take off now. That's consistency. With a podcast, I was literally at that point the only person doing it. You had done, and then around about the same time you started again, but I was literally the only person doing it. And so, everybody's going to listen to me because I'm the only voice. Yeah. And so, I'm aware that what I've done, there's quite a lot of serendipity. But if I was talking to somebody thinking about doing it, I would just say, look, decide on what you want out of it. As well as being a marketing engine, for me, it's helped me massively refine my thinking. I think any kind of content production, because you have to distill your own thoughts in a way to get them across, that has been incredibly powerful for me as a communicator, where it really counts with my clients, with my family, with my colleagues and staff here. It's massively helped me become a better communicator. There's no doubt about that. I would have done it for that reason alone. Okay. Yeah. So marketing, yes. Distilling of thoughts. And then even as a way of communicating with your own clients, it's incredibly powerful. Even if you don't get a single new client out of it, as a method of being consistent in communicating with your own clients, it's super powerful. So decide what you want out of it. And then you won't be aiming for something which actually is irrelevant to what you need.
Yeah, that's really key for me as well. I think I discovered after about 250 episodes that I wasn't scared of standing up on stage and speaking anymore.
Yeah.
It's a silly thing, but I'd obviously got so much confidence subconsciously, unconsciously through the practice of podcasting that actually an audience of 50 people to 100 people, 200 people was no big deal anymore, because it was it wasn't speaking to 10,000 people a month, it was speaking to a small audience, and the words come out
amazing. Yeah, brilliant.
It's an incredible benefit of it. Many financial planners do tell us that they're not looking for new clients, and I know Jackson's is still in the growth trajectory, which is fantastic, but you're in an interesting position. You're all the way down there in the southwest, so how do you obviously got a national, probably an international audience with your podcasts, with your videos. How do you balance the two when you get those inquiries? And the first one, no doubt, comes from Aberdeen. How do you work with people at distance and nationally, and how does that work?
So I use this format primarily, started with Skype and moved to Zoom because I find it a little bit less flaky than Skype very often. And it's not quite as good as face-to-face, but it's nearly there now with ubiquitous broadband and decent connections everywhere and stuff. So it does require a slight change in maybe the way you approach it. But for me, because people are finding me online, they're happy to work with me online. And that's, I think, is unusual. It's very unlikely, I think, that some random person in Aberdeen would stumble across Jackson's wealth management website where there's like hardly any content. It's just, here we are, come and see us if you want, sort of thing, and get in touch. But Meaningful Money, because of the consistency and all that sort of stuff, and the availability for all to consume it, people just they feel like they get to know you. Without exception, everybody that comes to me as a new client says, this is really weird. It's like I'm on a live podcast. It's like, I'm still me, right? And so you kind of over the first hurdle. There is no gaining of trust with the client because they've been listening to you for months. And so they already know how you tick. They already know how you work and what you think about how investing should be done, the power of planning. So there's no courtship. It's basically, look, okay, you want to work with me? This is the cost. Yes or no? And if it's like, okay, that's a bit more than I thought. No problem. Really sorry. I'm busy. It's got to be that. Or yeah, absolutely. When do we start? So again, it's been a sort of work in progress. I've learned about how to communicate. I've learned to look at a camera and not the screen below. Tiny little things are really important, right? But if you're talking to people about their deepest goals and worries about their money and everything, you need to eyeball them. And online, that means looking directly at the camera lens. I've learned to move around the Voyant planning software live with a client so that I can, show my worth in being able to use the software to think through the implications of what they're thinking of doing. All that sort of stuff. But it's only practice, man. But so it's almost as good as in person, not quite, but it's massively opened up the world to me. I mean, I am 10 miles from Land's End, right? It takes me 2 hours to get to Exeter, for crying out loud, right? So it's a long way, excuse me, it's a long way to anywhere. And so it's just opened up the world to me. I mean, I've got a waiting list now until the late summer. So, that you can't put a price on that. It's amazing.
No. So something else I find fascinating about the way you're doing things and the way your Meaningful Money platform has evolved over the years is following this model that we saw from Kevin Kelly, 1,000 True Fans, and you would have read his essay in the past and things. But you've built a tribe of very loyal, trusting followers and listeners and viewers. But the way you've then converted what you do away from that sort of one-to-one, which I know you still do, one-to-one advice, to one-to-many through courses, through your book. So do you see that as a transition that other financial planners will increasingly make in the future?
I think they could, and I think they should. Hit a bit of a milestone for Meaningful Money this week. I had to register for VAT, right? Wow. So it's now bringing in a certain amount of income in its own right through book sales, through affiliate arrangements, through courses. So, I mean, that's a surprise to me, but working with a gentleman called Kawayan, who is just an online marketing genius. So he's come on board to help me with that and has just sort of opened my eyes to what's possible, really. It's just another string to the bow. It's non-reg, of course, so it has its attractions from that point of view. But it's a lot of work. There's no easy way to achieve this. I mean, I work hard and long to build Meaningful Money because I love it still. But it is the responses from the tribe that really gets me out of bed in the morning. It's last year I had 25 grand worth of credit card debt, but using the tools you gave me, I've cleared it. I've now got an emergency fund and I'm saving for my kids. I just think, man, my work is done. If I had one of those, I'd die a happy man, but they come in thick and fast these days. And, 3,500 people in a Facebook group, and it's a group where there's a really good feeling about it. There's none of the snarkiness that you get, not least because we stamp on it when it does show up. But generally, it's a group full of people who want to help each other. And that's kind of my ethos. So it really does depend on what you want, Martin. If you want to build a really solid, long-lived financial planning practice, you don't have to do any of this, right? But it will only help if you do, for the reasons that we've talked about.
Yeah.
For me, I guess I just wanted to see what was possible, and I keep trying stuff, and more by luck than judgment, it keeps working, and I feel extremely blessed to have tried stuff and it have continued to work. So I'm bemused and blessed by it all, really.
Yeah. Bemused and blessed is a good place to be, isn't it? Do you ever see a time in the future when meaningful money becomes your main thing, and your Jackson's is no longer the driver, and no longer the sort of main source of revenue and things?
This is it's the sort of eternal struggle for me. I am in business with my two best mates in the world, so I'm never in a million years just going to say thanks for the memories, chaps. I'm off. Buy me out. I can see possibly some kind of convergence in time. I have no idea what form that would take. I have no desire, like any decent financial planning firm, we get approached at least once a week by somebody looking to buy us. And we've had some fairly eye-watering numbers waved in front of us. And we didn't even think twice, but say no, because we just weren't interested in selling to some lowest common denominator consolidator. Cornwall's a small world, right? If I sell my clients down the river, I'm going to have to either have extensive plastic surgery or I'm going to have to move out of the county because I'll be lynched. So I just don't want to do that. So I do feel somewhat torn, but the convergence is happening already. Meaningful Money drives, it's 2/3 of all new inquiries last year came from Meaningful Money into Jackson's. It'll probably be 3/4. I can see it'll be maybe 2/3 of new business revenue possibly will come from Meaningful Money this year. And so it's becoming increasingly important. And so it's changing Jackson's. I have the biggest team here because I need it. Yes. And so I can see it just continuing to change, and that'll happen organically. And that's fine by me. I really would like for as long as possible to stay at the coalface with real people. But doing the bits that I like and not the bits that I don't. That's the goal.
That's always the goal. Always the goal. To wrap things up then, for anyone listening to this conversation, watching this conversation, who wants to get started, who wants to start that YouTube channel, who wants to start their podcast, what are the first steps? What would you, given all that learning, all that experience you've had over the past decade, how would you do it today differently to how you did it 10 years ago? How would you get started now?
I think knowing what I know now, I would get started by saying, what do I want out of it? Now, for me, I never expected it to drive revenue. I never expected it to drive clients to Jackson's. And that meant my expectations were very low, which I think helped. So that meant when nobody was watching and nobody was really listening, that was fine. I was doing it for my own pleasure almost. Now, time is precious, right? Most advisors listening to this don't have whole loads of spare time. But for me, I don't play golf. I don't watch telly. What I do is mess around with software and technology and stuff. And so it was easy for me. If I was starting from scratch now, I would set out what I wanted from it. I would pick the medium that appeals to me most and give it a try. I would sit down and write 50 to 75 headlines for what I wanted to talk about, subject lines, all right, for a blog or for a podcast or whatever. Because I reckon if you can't do that, you're probably going to run out of stuff to say fairly quick. However, any advisor listening to this, the questions you get asked by clients week in, week out. That's your starting point. I would probably read They Ask You Answer by Marcus Sheridan. That would be a good place for folks to start for the principle of answering people's questions. He posits the big 5 questions that people ask all the time. You can build 75 podcast episodes around just those 5 questions easily, and probably many more. I would read Known by Mark Schaefer as well. I used to recommend a book called Platform by Michael Hyatt, but that's a little bit old now. Known is a little bit more current. And just immerse yourself in the medium that you want to try. I generally say become a consumer first. And then if you want to, there's a step between consumer and creator, which is curator. You can curate other people's content for your audience, build an audience by finding the best stuff and curating it and putting links out. By doing so, you'll build contacts as well, which will help. But I'll become a consumer first. I was listening to podcasts just voraciously. Yeah. And so when I sat down to do my own, I already had a sense of how I wanted it to sound and all that sort of stuff. So consume first and then create. And there's a step along the way if you want to, which is to curate, which kind of gives you a stepping stone into the whole online marketing piece. But there's tons of stuff online about how to do it. And some of it's really good. A lot of it is garbage, but there's some really good stuff about how to do this.
Yeah, and if you consume a ton of podcasts and different genres and things, you can steal the best bits and you can bring it together, put your own style on it, and make it your own thing. So that's really good advice. Pete, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll put links in the show notes to Meaningful Money, to your Twitter and things like that, so people can find you nicely. You're easy to find online anyway, but so people can find you anyway in our show notes. I'll do that now. But thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, mate. Always good to chat. Thank you.
A big thank you to Pete Matthew for joining us for this episode of the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook. I really enjoyed that conversation. That was a really good one. Hopefully you got lots out of that, particularly in these difficult times we're going through. You can find useful links, you can find show notes and a full transcript of our conversation at bamfordmedia.co.uk/podcast. I know we're going through some quite challenging times at the moment, individually, as businesses, for society as a whole. And I really just wanted to say at this point, it is good to talk. And I've had various conversations over the past week, 10 days, with financial planners in all parts of the country. And sometimes the problems that we feel we're facing on our own seem to be far less dramatic, far less significant when we actually just talk them through and we get a different point of view. So I'm here if you want to have a chat about any aspect of your digital marketing, or if you just want a shoulder to cry on, just someone to chat to, just get in touch. Easiest way to do that is to book some time in my calendar, bamfordmedia.co.uk/discovery-call. And it's not a discovery call in the sense I won't use that as an opportunity to sell anything to you, but I'd love to have conversations with financial planners, especially if you're finding things difficult and you just want a second opinion on something or just someone to vent to. Book some time in my calendar and we can chat. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and please do take a moment to subscribe, tell a friend about the podcast, and really help spread the word. But we will be back. Thank you for listening.